All right, welcome to the Sexy Business Podcast. I am Spooky Dangerous of THM Studios, and this is Lud Neko. Say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Wait, you can actually wave with your rig, right?
I don't have that set up. I have to find the
okay.
piece of tech, because I haven't used it in like years. Because I used to use it, and it was like such a hassle because I have to wear this like technical thing on my
the
chest.
gloves. Oh, okay, right.
No. It's like even more like it's Leap Motion, if you've ever heard of it. It's like a game dev tool because it's
Cool.
meant to just track hand movements so that like game devs could basically work in like VR without having to have a headset on. And then VTubers just found a way to make it work with your model if you wear the camera on your chest, which
That's
is really
cool.
awkward. I had to like basically tape it to a belt that I didn't like just tied around my chest.
Wow. Okay, well, we've already had our first tangent of the episode. We're doing great. But this is supposed to be the lore and backstory episode where we're introducing everybody to us and what the show is going to be about. And I wanted you to get started.
All right. Well, yes, I go by Lewd Neko, although I'm Lewd Neko Nya on a couple of sites because Lewd Neko is the most generic username of all time. I also do sometimes go by just Neko-chan. And as I alluded to, I am a VTuber or LewdTuber, virtual cam girl, whatever you want to call it. I've been streaming for almost 4 years now, which is really wild to say out loud. I started streaming during the pandemic as basically a joke. I was like, oh, it'd be funny to just like read lewd visual novels online, and then a lot of people really liked it. And so now I'm here. I can be found on normie social media, just Twitter, because Tumblr and Instagram and all of that are basically very NSFW phobic, which is, I'm sure, a topic we'll get to someday. And then I am also on Discord. And then when it comes to websites, I am on Chatterbait, ePlay, and RPlay.
Nice.
And then what I do is I do a mix of basically gaming and camming with a huge focus on specifically eroge. I play eroge almost exclusively, so lots of lewd visual novels, the little RPG Maker games. I've been playing a lot of Alice soft games lately. Occasionally I do play like safe for work games, but with like NSFW rule sets. So I've done like heel sledding streams for people familiar with that concept, like playing Overwatch as a submissive, basically. And then also just a lot of, I would say, talking about fetish and kink and lewd gaming and hentai and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, because a lot of, and especially in our conversations and setting this up, a lot of what we wanted to convey was to kind of normalize the games in this space. Especially recently, this kind of field is really blowing up, and a lot more people are being exposed to being able to have these kinds of experiences. And we want to make it seem less weird and strange.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know, like, I think one of the funniest things I've experienced, like, as a woman, I guess, is that I have met a lot of usually men who play porn games, and they are just so fucking shocked when they're like, "Wait, you recognize what it is that I'm talking about?" Like, I was literally having a conversation with someone the other day, and I had alluded to the fact that I was like, "Oh, I play some of the lewd games occasionally, blah blah blah," and he starts describing like a very specific scene from Harem Hotel, and I recognize the character instantly, and I'm like, "Oh, you're talking about this character." And just like the look of shock on his face is always kind of funny. But there's so many of us is what I think I've discovered from streaming and like interacting with my chat is like, it's just average people who enjoy indulging in all sorts of SFW gaming, whether it's visual novels or if you enjoy like more of the 3D character models or like VR porn. VR games are becoming super popular and interesting. So I'm hoping it'll become more normalized, especially now that like Steam has been overall pretty friendly towards NSFW gaming.
Yeah, Steam has been really popular in because before that it was kind of Newgrounds, right, and everything was free and it was hard to monetize, and then we've had
Mhm.
itch.io kind of pop up and start to really show a lot of indie stuff, and then Steam has done a really good job at showing off some of the higher end stuff that's come into exist.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of almost feels similar to how like anime has gotten popular, partially because like a lot of the major streaming started picking up anime. Like I remember, back in the early 2010s when Netflix had like maybe 5 or 10 animes. Like I know Death Note was like one of them, and that was really popular like when I was in school because that was the one that everybody could watch and it was just available to them, and they're like, "Oh, this exists." And I know a lot of people, as soon as like Steam allowed the porn games and they started showing up on people's feeds and stuff like that, they were just like, "Oh, I had no idea games like this were out there, or that they were like quality." Because I think the really interesting thing is seeing NSFW games in like the top 10 like bestsellers of like the week or whatever, and seeing just how popular these games are, even if people aren't talking about them because they might be embarrassed and whatnot. There's a lot of people playing them.
Yeah, there's a lot of people searching and scrolling through looking for it. And we
Yeah,
had
definitely.
one last bit on the law, which was a bit about your history in coming to this point. Because we talked
Yeah.
briefly about Newgrounds and some of that kind of inception of discovering this kind of content. But I figured it was definitely worth going into in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so I guess I should also give my like age. I feel like that's a little bit of context. Like, so I'm 24 right now. So I was like, I started getting on the internet more in like the 2010s. About was when I was sort of allowed officially, and I had unrestricted internet access. My family was very conservative, but they just sort of trusted me that I wouldn't go on bad sites. But I totally did. Although for me, like my initial introduction was Rule 34, because I remember hearing about that as like a joke online. Like it was a common phrase, like, "Oh, Rule 34, if a character exists, there's porn of it." And I wanted to know like what all those words meant. So I literally just went on like the Rule 34 website and like looked at the homepage and was like, "Oh my God."
Yeah, it's
And
like
to
if there exists
me,
and there is porn of it, I must find it.
yeah, and, like, to me, I think it was more, like, accessible because, like, I've always been really into fictional characters. Like, I think that's another big thing I talk about a lot in my streams is, like, I am fully into, like, waifus and husbandos, like, having those fictional characters you are, like, obsessed with and in love with and all that stuff. Like, that started pretty young for me. I remember, being attracted to, like, Shigo from Kim Possible or,
Yeah,
um
huge.
yeah, or like I don't know, whatever like characters I was seeing on, Cartoon Network or Disney or whatnot. And so when I saw like, NSFW of them, I remember Princess Peach was one I looked up a lot because I thought she was super cute in Smash Bros. And I remember
Yeah.
like doing the thing where I would go into photo mode and like try to look at her face because you could do that in Brawl and Melee. You can't do it
Classic.
anymore though. And then from there, like, yeah, I think I went to Newgrounds pretty soon after that, just because it was another website that was like on the surface, it's not like a porn site if your parents see you on it, right? They're just like, oh, you're looking at cartoons or whatever. But they had that huge adult section, so as long as like nobody was looking over my shoulder, I would be exploring whatever animations or games were popping up. And so, I think of stuff like, Zone 10 animations or like even like the Meet and Fuck games and all of those
Yep.
like really bad just porn games. But, when you're 12 or 13 and you don't have options, that's really hot to you. Though there were definitely also some really good ones on there. Like I remember the like Crystal from Star Fox. Like I remember there's a couple
Yep.
of games with her that were like pretty well done and stuff like that. And also definitely introduced me to monster fucking. I mean, there was so many like monster and Pokemon and tentacles and all that stuff
Yeah,
that
and
I feel like
furry
is pretty
content as
common.
well, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I wasn't officially a furry until I was like 17 and Zootopia happened and I was like, fuck. But before that I was definitely like, oh, I think the characters are cool. Um, everybody has like that Lola Bunny moment where they're like, she's hot, but I'm not a furry.
My
And then
thing's always
from
been
there,
like, if the art is good, it doesn't matter. And so much of the
yeah.
furry artists are like actually such high quality that you're like, oh, I just don't think about it in the same way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, some of the best like animations, at least back then, were done by furries because they were just dedicated. It was like that. I
Mm.
remember a lot of yaoi because I also had a yaoi phase that happened like simultaneously. So like trying to find like yaoi flash games and stuff like that. And eventually, I know the other site, and I was actually on this one earlier today just to see if it was like still up. Was com.game. They had like a huge adult section, and like they had specifically they had some of the Zonton games that were like paywalled. They had just rips of them basically. So I was able to access some of that content, as well as a lot of other games that were sort of just hidden throughout the internet, and it was just like this huge collection of all sorts of stuff. And then eventually I would start getting into like actual like non-flash basically porn games, more so as an adult. I think officially Honey Pop was like technically the one that took my virginity.
The first
When I
Steam
was
porn game.
Yeah, because that was like one of the few games you could get and patch back in like because like I remember playing that one in 2017 because it was like the meme game. Like
Mm.
everybody was like, it's the sexy match 3, but it was actually really good. And I got super fucking into it because I am legitimately I just love Honey Pop's like gameplay. I'm a huge puzzle game fan, and I put like way too many hours into Honey Pop too. And then it would just be like a couple years after that. So I think it was 2019 that the porn ban on Steam was officially lifted, and I basically just went crazy from there. And then I would start streaming the next year, and I got introduced to like so many games through that.
Yeah, especially now that the distribution model is a bit more available, so many more developers are able to make content and create it. And I've seen a lot with artists that are starting to realize that having something like a game model where they release new content to the game regularly is much easier to keep subscribers on stuff like Patreon. So it's only going to get
Yeah.
bigger, surely.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I see it as being similar to how visual novels are becoming like I wouldn't say big because like the visual novel like market like it's not profitable. Yeah, but like it's definitely becoming like super accessible for people to make like very short little like dating sims like to experiment and
Mm.
stuff like that. And some of those people like if they have the right concept, they end up really taking off if they can get a Kickstarter going or whatnot. Like one of my particular niches is the like horror porn subgenre of visual novel, which is basically just a more hardcore version of like yandere dating sims. But like it basically started with like a couple of artists who independently made games that were sort of like that, and then a lot of people suddenly realized they really wanted more content like that. So I've been seeing a lot of like games in that same basically like weird subgenre popping up on Itch.io lately. A lot of them are demos, and a lot of them unfortunately don't really make it past that stage, which is super
Mm.
common,
Yeah.
especially for NSFW games. I think a lot of people have good ideas, but then they actually have to execute it, and it just is like, that requires a lot of hard work. Never mind. But it's like for every 10 demos that kind of just get abandoned, there's like one really good one that maybe makes it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I
But
think it might be my turn
yeah,
to
toss it on over to you.
unveil myself. So I've been largely unseen, but I'm kind of the backbone of THM Studios. We've had a couple of people come and go, and I was brought on at the start, and like I'm now the main guy, basically. I run all the artists, I organize all the content and stuff like that, and we have a lot of different people working with us to build the games that we have. But THM has been around since the end of 2021, and so I've been basically working in game dev throughout that time. With pretty much everything THM. I do have like a lot of other stuff on the side, and I do have a different day job, but that is still in games. But yeah, I kind of have been working in with THM, which is like really specifically visual novel porn games, where the goal is to have like really high quality art of the characters, and then like an immersive story that makes you feel like these are real people and stuff like that. And then coming to that, I guess. Well, actually, I should give a little fun fact. So my my username Spooky Dangerous. I had to change my Discord username because I use Discord for all of my work stuff, and I had to change it so that I wasn't just doxing myself constantly.
I had a similar thing happen when I started where this was like technically my like old Discord account, and then I started
Yeah,
using it for like VTuber stuff, and then I realized, oh, I'm gonna keep doing this, and I had to like nuke all of my like old friend list and be like, hey, I'm here now. Don't ask why.
yeah, right. Well, I have to do all my regular work stuff with my full name. A lot of servers demand it even. And so now with this, it's like, okay, I just have to change it for all of these servers and fix it that way. But Spooky Dangerous was the name of a WAV file for a haunted house background soundtrack thing that I was working on at the time. And I was like, this sounds really silly. like someone trying to be really edgy and failing, and I thought that would be really funny. But yeah, so I work with all of the THM stuff as basically a game dev thing, and my idea coming into this kind of a podcast idea was to be able to talk a lot about games and stuff in this space, as things have really blown up recently. But I guess also just coming off the back of your history with lewd content, I should do some of mine as well, because mine is pretty similar, I think. I'm 30 recently, so I am definitely old. I'm older than dirt. And I discovered I started watching porn when I was about 12 or 11.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the pretty common age.
Yeah. I was playing RuneScape. So what would happen is my parents would get up and leave for work, and the garage door was really loud, and I would wake up and I would go into the computer room and play RuneScape until I had to leave to go to school. And then I discovered pornography, and that very, very drastically changed my schedule. But at the time, a lot of the websites and stuff that were available were really shit. And so it was hard to like actually find anything good, or like really navigate to kind of what you want, or follow any particular person, right? Because this would have been 18 years ago. This is like 2006. Where the internet was not the commercial gladiator scape that it is now. And early on, I discovered Newgrounds, which is what I thought was so funny, that we both kind of had that same entry point, because I think it was really big, and it doesn't get enough credit for what it actually accomplished in its time. But I discovered Newgrounds through music, because I had a dream of being a very successful DJ. And I sort of was, and then retired. But I just use that skill now to make like the background music and stuff for our games. And so I discovered it through music. I'm doing all this music stuff. I'm uploading things, and I'm like, okay, I'm bored. I'm waiting. I'm browsing around the site, and I find adult games, and I'm like, okay, look, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me at 12 years old.
Right? It's just like, wait, those are cartoon characters I recognize, and they're naked?
Yeah, even some of the ones that I liked the best were ones that I did not know. But obviously, the Zone 10 Teen Titans stuff was huge. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I know them from the television. And then like lots of other cool stuff, and like some of the interactivity stuff was really cool, where even if the game itself was just like basically a repeating loop of like a single or maybe 2 or 3 different sex positions, where you could change like the outfits or like the speed or whatever, which is kind of what a lot of games were at the time, and there still is a lot like that. Still felt so much more engrossing than just regular video content that you could find, or even images for the most part, which I thought was really cool. And then I was actually working at THM when I started actually properly looking at games on Steam. So we had already released games on Steam before I actually was like, you know what, actually I should go and look at everything on the platform. I've since done like Subverse. I've done a couple of the big ones. Let's see if I can quickly open up my library here, because I have a whole folder which is porn.
Yeah, there's all like the Illusion Soft games, so like Koikatsu. I don't remember. I have like custom made's on Steam. I think that's off Steam. There's like a ton of like the Sakura visual novels that are kind of shovelware, but I've seen a lot of those.
There is a lot of shovelware. There's a couple where I've like checked it out because of an artist. Like Doxy has a couple ones, and I was like, well, I should go and have a look at this. One of the other ones I really liked was Quickie, a love hotel story.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one.
I'm also just like autistically really enjoying the hotel management sim, and then like I finish all of that stuff, and it's like, now you can fuck people. I'm like, oh yeah, shit, that was in this game, huh?
I mean, I love games like that though. Like, I mean, I've really enjoyed. There's only a couple of them I would say that like lewd games have like really fucking engrossing gameplay. But I those are some of the ones I enjoy the best, because like for me, like I know this sounds silly. I guess because I've been playing porn games so much, like the whole appeal of like, oh, there's boobs now isn't like as like, you know, magical as it is like the first time you play a porn game. So I end up getting way more invested in like, okay, is like the gameplay and storytelling actually good? Because I don't know, I actually don't play a lot of like I forget what the visual novel term. It's either Nakige or Nukige. I get them confused all the time. One of them means crying game, and one of them means fapping game, and those are very different reasons for needing tissues. But they're the kind of visual novel where it's just like, it's just an artist who is sort of loosely connecting a bunch of like art with like, 10 lines of dialogue in between sex scenes. Like there's
Yeah,
no
a lot of
plot.
them are like that, but there are some that I really enjoyed that like either had really good, distinct and different gameplay or had really good world building. Like Dawn World was like, you are in
Yeah.
this place, this is what this realm is like, and this is how people are treated. And instantly I'm like, you dared to dream, I'm invested.
Yeah. I think that's one of the fun things that like lewd gaming can explore is like using sort of fetish and kink as like world building, or like imagining like, okay, if you have magic or if you have super kinds of technology,
Yeah.
or like
What
whatever
if
it
we
is that you
didn't
want to sort
live
of,
in a puritanical society?
yeah, what if people just fucked in public, like
Yeah,
like
exactly.
and that can create so many unique opportunities for character interactions that you would never have in like any other kind of storytelling.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And I think daring to dream. So like even if it isn't successful, right? Even if it comes out, it has this idea and it is shit, it still contributes so much to everything, and it still teaches people working in the space so much stuff. In a lot of other creative fields, you will see people come out with something really brave and daring and try something new, and then it might flop or whatever. But then later on, you see people referring to it or like using this little nugget from it that teaches you something about it. And I think porn games is really the same, right? Like in its infancy, you could really see just how much it was maybe just one single animated piece of art, or like barely any text, or a lot of it's parody content, right? Because people weren't able to sell original characters as easily, and people were already kind of invested in parody content. And then you can see what it looks like more modernly, where people have evolved from this. And I think Sex Note is a really good example. This game is a parody of the Death Note, except you write someone's name in it and you have sex with them. But that's actually not the plot at all. You don't actually write anything in the book. The book is like a menu that you buy special powers with that let you see people naked. But there's also like lots of exploring the town and lots of like going to different places and helping people with stuff. But then also there's just on top of all of the original characters they have, there's just a lot of random parody stuff. Like Mia Khalifa's in the game, Lady Dimitrescu is in the game, and stuff like this, where you're just like, it's really hard to stay immersed in the story and believe that this is a real place and things are happening. And instead, there's just like, oh, here's this random side content that I've written for this month's Patreon release where I can go and meet Lady Dimitrescu. But it's also like, okay, how is this studio learned from the things that have come before them and gone, oh, actually, this is just what the people wanted, and I'm just giving people what they've asked for, or this is just something exciting that happened rather than maintaining a continuous narrative or whatever. Because like THM is desperately like, okay, I'm selling you on this world, these are the main characters that you care about, and you are really stuck here and dealing with this problem, which makes doing random parody content kind of hard, or like silly, or it feels tonally different or whatever. So I think it is interesting to see how people have learned and grown and changed and that kind of stuff. And like even Subverse, which made over $1 million on Kickstarter, and
Crazy.
pains me greatly to acknowledge that. And then because their game is very slowly in development and kind of releases little bits and pieces every couple of months or so. It's the same kind of thing. We're going to have like this really high quality SFM type cutscenes, which just basically comes on a long history of using SFM as this kind of the beginning of animating characters that people knew already in the parody content, and like building on those skills and go, okay, what if this actually was a serious kind of harem type game? And a lot of that stuff is really interesting to me. I don't know if that's obvious or not. But yeah,
I mean, I think it makes sense when you consider like how big like the doujin scene is like in Japan. Like
huge.
that's just sort of our like Western equivalent, is like, taking cartoon characters or like Western game characters, and you think of something like Overwatch, where like people
sure.
know it for porn, like like people recognize characters specifically because they saw them on Pornhub.
I think Overwatch contributed more to porn than any one single named actress, which is kind of unreal, right?
It was like one of the top search terms, I think, one year on like Pornhub's like, year in review or whatever. And I remember when like the huge like porn ban happened on Pornhub, like so much Overwatch stuff got taken down and people were really upset about that.
Because they couldn't have been a verified actress, right? So it would have all had to have been deleted.
Diva doesn't have an ID, so
yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of stuff is really interesting as well. Because I watched recently, and we mentioned this briefly before, there's a Lexitorius video where he goes through the history of Rule 34 and talks about how, like, the evolution of SFM, the evolution of, like, early Blender, and stuff like that, and, like, the release of Overwatch and how people are able to take these assets and use them. A lot of the stuff that I see now on my Twitter feed is both that and then also original characters where people have taken those same methods and same lessons to be able to start building these different things. And it's really not that far away from just making 20 unique ones of those and then writing a narrative that ties them together to make it a product that you can sell as a game.
Yeah, I mean that's like a lot of people have been doing that with like the Illusion Soft. So like there's a ton of visual novels on like itch.io for free that are made using assets either from Koikatsu or Honey Select typically, and people are able to explore some really interesting narratives where like if you're a solo writer and you don't really have the time to learn how to make a model from scratch and you don't have time to like pay people or you don't have the money to pay people all of that, there are like options nowadays, and then especially with stuff like Ko-fi or Patreon or Subscribestar, which I think a lot of people are going to have to move to pretty soon because Patreon's slowly getting tighter and tighter on its like rules and stuff like that. But it gives options for people to use easily accessible assets to tell like really interesting stories, because the visuals are still important, and there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do. I've explored a little bit with like Koikatsu Studio Mode, which is basically just it's like basic modeling stuff like that. And I don't know how to do it well. Like some people can really excel in Koikatsu, which is the fandom for that is pretty insane. Like how dedicated the modders are for adding new stuff into it. But people are able to make some like really impressive stuff just using a single game studio mode basically.
I think there's a lot of talented people in this space, and I think that because of that, puritanical overview of the industry that we're in, is that it gets diminished. People don't recognize some of the real talent that goes into this. And I mean, people don't recognize some of the real talent that goes in the game dev at large, because of just how complicated it is and how much art and stuff really does go into it.
Yeah, I see that talked about a lot when like people talk about like usually specifically how like visual novels are priced.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are like, I shouldn't have to pay $10 for a visual novel. But like I think of like, if you buy a book, like I would say most paperbacks, if you go to like Barnes and Noble or whatever, are like minimum, if you can get it on sale, maybe 12, usually more like 15. And that's for like maybe like a 300 to 400 page like young adult novel or whatever. And then you go on like you get like a visual novel for like $10, and it could have like easily like 20 hours minimum of story. It's got art, it's got music, it might have some form of voice acting in it. Like it has all of this stuff, and then people just don't really acknowledge how hard it is to write something well, much less to have the good art and all of that other nice stuff to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, we have that same problem, right? Where we've got 3 different games that are all at different price points. Shackle's the first one that we did, is the longest one, has the most stuff going for it. But because all 3 of them are in early access, the way that it goes is each month, and like matches the Patreon cycle, you're going to get content for it, which is usually like 1 to 2 scenes and a couple pieces of art. And everyone's like, oh, this isn't enough or whatever. I'm like, well, the one guy illustrating it or whatever can only do so much in that time. And if you want it to be high quality content, it is going to take this long. And that means that, it is going to be kind of dribble fed, but because it is being consistently updated, you can always go, okay, I come in here and I got this one, I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back in a few months and then get an update, which is going to like match my appetite for how much content I want to have in it. I mean, like even that's still my spending habit. I did that recently with Cyan Capsules, My Pig Princess, which I'm a big fan of. I got on originally in version 3, and I've just come back now, which is version 7. And I think there's really only 2, maybe 2.5 new major scenes since then. But they are like quite in depth, and Cyan Capsules, because it's one person doing all the illustration of like background and characters and all this kind of stuff, is so much more consistent with all the things. And I think Cyan is writing it as well, which makes it really interesting to see it. Like it all blends together really, really clean. I swear to God, this is not an ad. But like coming and playing it the first time, you get to the end of it and you're like, okay, if they only add 20 minutes of content after this, am I really going to want to stick around a whole month for that, or would I just come back later? and grab like in the next hour or whatever, right? And so I kind of expect that from other people that follow our stuff in the same way. But then on Steam, you're just kind of like, well, that's fine. I'll just come back to it whenever because I have it forever. And when you're buying it at $10 or whatever in early access, you own it forever. And when the game is complete, you will still have it. Content will be coming out the whole time, and you'll still have it ready for you whenever you want to come back to it. I think a lot of people don't consider that also, because most things aren't finished. Like, most things will have content later. Like Subverse, even if you bought it at full price, that game is not half complete based on the reports that they have on the development of the game. And they had $1 million. And we don't have $1 million. And what we do have is this podcast.
Or like even something like Corruptions of Champions 2, which is available completely for free just on their website. But if you buy it on Steam, I think it's like maybe 10 or 15 bucks. You get updates earlier, but like for me, like the reason why I bought it is like Corruptions of Champions was also one of like my like early porn games because it was like one that I could play on my Mac because I grew up on a Mac, so I had very limited options for what I could do.
My condolences.
Yeah, right. But like Corruptions of Champions had a Mac version. And so it was also something I could play pretty easily without having to worry about it because there wasn't too much art in the first version of the game. There was maybe like a couple of like, character busts or like things like that, but there wasn't any CGs, I don't think. I know Corruptions of Champions 2 has CGs. But it looked like I was reading something. So I had to worry less about like, oh, what if mom walks in or something like that. And then, I ended up buying it, now that I'm adult and that the second one is in development because I was just like thankful for this like group of writers for working so hard, not only in the first game, but now in the second game. And they had a ton of content with updates. Like I don't even keep up with it. I binged like a ton of it a couple years ago and I want to get back into it eventually, but like I still like read the update logs just for fun. I mean, they add so many like new scenes and more storylines and, sexy scenes and whatnot with like new characters. So like that's definitely worth the price for me, especially because another thing I consider when I'm buying games or supporting a Patreon or Kickstarter or whatever it is like if it's my fetish, I need to support that because I need that thing to exist. And I guess it's something unique about like marketing and creating lewd games is that like when people talk about how like furries are able to make so much freaking money off of like NSFW commissions, it's because furries are a very dedicated niche. Not all of them are fetishists, of course, but like for the ones that are, like they are into it. And it's the same thing for like fuda, as I'm sure you've seen with your games, or cucking or femdom or monster fucking or whatever niche you want to tackle. Even if it's like vanilla, is a niche. Like some people I know are just like, man, I just want a really wholesome, romantic but sexy game. And
what if they were holding hands?
Right? What if they said I love you and looked lovingly into each other's eyes? But that's partly of like why I really try to support those games that have the things I want, because I want them to succeed. I want other people to see their success and think, hey, that's my fetish. What if I make a game like that? Even like I backed Lewd Idol Project years ago because I was a huge fan of like the idol anime genre, and it was just so surprising to me that there's not more lewd idol visual novels. There's like a couple. I know there's like one that's about like a masochistic idol or something, and then there's Shining Song Star Nova, which is a really good one that like nobody's ever played. But it took them to really make the lewd part, I would say, like a real big feature of the game, but it still has like an interesting plot. It's fairly like kind of standard fare, like cute girls doing cute things, and there's a little bit of emotional drama. But it was like really nicely done, and so that's why like I keep supporting their stuff. Also because I look oftentimes with like indie games in general, but especially with lewd games, I usually pay a little bit more attention to who the dev is. Or who the dev team are, like what do they value, what do they support, and a really big thing to me is like I'm very like anti-censorship, and I'm very pro like kink and sex work and all of that like sexy good stuff. So I want to support the fellow artists and dev teams who are trying to promote that kind of content, because I know how hard it is to just be any kind of NSFW creator online, and especially if you're trying to make money off of it, there are just so many things you have to consider, and there is so much red tape and bullshit you will have to deal with eventually.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there was one thing that I wanted to add on to that. There it was a piece of advice that I got a couple of years ago, which was spending your money is voting on what you want to see in the world, and like that's one of the big principles that we have at the on the Patreon and stuff like that. It's like we don't expect you to be here. I'm actually like really pro our games being pirated and stuff like that. I found one of our games on a rip site recently, and all I did was just vote it 5 stars so that more people will find it. But the thing is, you have to if you really like it, you have to spend the money on it, because like we rely on the money to do this for a living, and if we aren't getting money, we have to spend that time doing other stuff that does get money, which means the games suffer. And so like the more support that these creators receive, the more ability they have to actually make the content that you like. And if you're not spending money on it, that's people not voting for that thing to exist, and it will fade away. And the same thing, like the furries have this such big dollar spend on this kind of stuff, and that's why it has been so prolific and why it has been so successful as a niche, because there's just so much art being created of it constantly.
Yeah, I think that's something that, it's because porn is seen as so like lowly and base, and people are very used to getting it for free, right? That it can be hard to convince people sometimes that there's value to buying your porn, whether it's, I buy physical copies of like my favorite doujins if they're available overseas and stuff like that, because I'm like, I fucking loved reading this on, a rip site. So I would rather support like not only the official English translation, so that way more of these like doujins and stuff get translated, but also so I can support the artists, like even from overseas and stuff like that. And then, I thought the thing you mentioned about piracy is interesting, because I know there's been like a bunch of surveys done on piracy, specifically within the visual novel community usually, and there's like a surprising amount of people who, they pirate, they try the game and they end up really liking it, and so they end up buying the full game and like supporting the devs and like their future endeavors and stuff like that. So there is something, I think even, what was it, Slay the Princess recently, I think they made like a tweet like encouraging people to pirate the game. They're like, hey, if you're not sure about whether or not you'll like it, go ahead and pirate our game, and if you can't afford it right now, if someday you can afford it, we would appreciate that kind of support. And that was like such an interesting stance for like a sort of average developer to be putting out into the public.
Oh, but there's no way anyone AAA is going to have that opinion, right? But for us, especially with like a live service game, anything you pirate is going to be incomplete. Like we will always have more content for you to be able to come back and get later. So any piracy of our games is just basically you getting a really up-to-date demo that we don't have to make, right? I've never thought of any downside of it, and it would be hypocritical of me to complain about people illegally downloading my stuff when all of the software that I use is illegally downloaded to create it.
Oh man, that's like a whole other thing, just like how expensive certain software and stuff can be.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we should wrap it up there. We did want to try and stick to a roughly 30-minute episode, so that what we're doing is we're picking a particular topic, we're making a deep dive into it and talking a bit about it. This one went a little bit longer, but this is a very special first episode where we're doing a bit of introduction, so you can get a bit of a feel for us as a team and get a bit of a vibe for what this show is going to be like. But in the future, we will have one topic and we will be diving into that and talking a bit about it. We've already got a couple up and listed, and maybe we'll have some special guests. We're working on some stuff. Some of the visuals will change. This is a work in progress after all. And hopefully you'll stick around with us. Hit the subscribe button, check out our socials, and support us where you can. Because the goal is to use this as a way to communicate with the community about what game devs like, so that you can have some kind of window into what it is like creating these things. And if you wanted to be able to create them, get some advice or a hearing about what it is like to be one of these creators, so that hopefully we can show you that it is possible to be able to do this kind of thing. Because, and again, a piece of advice that I got from someone is you could spend your entire life walking around thinking that the amazing idea in your head is worthless to everyone else, but there is somebody else in the world desperately wishing for that thing to exist. And especially in our niche, that is really true. And well, maybe one of you will be the person that makes that dream come true.
Make your sexy dreams into sexy realities. You can do it.
Exactly. All right, well, that is us from the Sexy Business Podcast. Hopefully, we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.